So the lesson today, as you can see, is about race and skin color mostly. This is a lesson that really isn't so applicable to this group of people here, but when I first did this lesson back in 2017, I was in a largely black church, and some of the people there definitely had a skin color problem. And so this was a lesson to show them how skin color is not a thing and shouldn't be a thing, and is also we're all just really one race of people, and skin color doesn't matter. So we'll look at that, and you'll see a lot of things that I think you'll find are interesting in this lesson. Okay, so it's human nature to categorize things. We do that all the time. In all sorts of parts of our lives, we organize things together into meaningful and workable groups that make some sense. And anthropologists have always done the same thing with people. But for ourselves, we do that even in like our kitchen cupboards. If we have plates, we stack the plates on top of them, and they're all in this one place. You don't spread the plates over all 5 cupboards you might have. And so we organize things because it makes sense to organize things. And so anthropologists, when they first started studying man, that's what anthropology means, they tried to classify people by physical characteristics. And basically, mostly that was done on skin color, because that's the most obvious difference in physical characteristics. And so that resulted in 3 different groups: Caucasian, Mongoloid, and Negro. And remember, this is back in the 1700s kind of time, and people didn't travel around the world like they do now, so they didn't know that many different groups of people. But as they came to realize that there were a lot of differences outside that Caucasian, Mongoloid, Negro grouping that they had created, they realized that they were either going to have to add a whole large number of groups to encompass all of the different people that they were discovering lived on the planet. And so eventually they realized that all of these groups would wind up with really arbitrary and useless names. You couldn't really distinguish people that way, and not in any productive way. And so they realized eventually that these things were completely arbitrary breakdowns, and that skin color didn't really mean anything. You couldn't look at a person and say he's black and therefore he will do this. You couldn't predict anything by knowing skin color or any other characteristics like that. And so in the early 1900s, the anthropologists simply stopped using physical characteristics for classification because it wasn't giving them anything that was useful. And so this lesson is focused on that idea of, does skin color mean anything to us in a population or as a person? And so we're going to look a lot at skin color here and how we get skin color. And some of you may know, but if you don't know, skin color comes from what's called melanin in our skin. And that's something that is a polymer that's generated in your body. And so these polymers are pigments hiding below your skin, deep at just below the skin layer there. And these pigments have a natural color to them. And there's actually 2 of them. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. So this melanin is produced by what are called melanocytes. And those are deep under the skin. And they are the things that produce these pigmentation colors. And so despite what skin color you might have, you have the same number of melanocytes under your skin, the same number per square inch, for example. And so everybody, at least almost everybody, has those. There are a few people who are exceptions to that, but those are unnatural things. And so these melanocytes generate this coloration, and that's what their function is to generate melanin. And but they can produce different amounts of it. And so that's what gives us the differences in skin colors. So these melanocytes, based on your genes, can generate a different amount of melanin. So if they create a whole bunch of the brown melanin, then you get very dark brown skin. And if they don't produce any, then you get white skin. And they do a range of colors in between there. So the production rate of these melanocytes determines the amount of color you have in your skin. And it's only skin deep, as I said. And so the amount they produce is controlled by your genes, so the genes you got from your parents, really, and they got from their parents and going all the way back. But it is affected by a whole bunch of other little factors, and we'll talk about that. It's only affected in small ways mostly, but there are some exceptions to that as well, too. So we're going to be looking at a color chart that shows how these different colors come about genetically. And so you need to understand a little bit of background on what that chart is going to be showing. And it's going to have little boxes like you see on the right here. And these boxes are the 4 genes that everybody has for their skin color. And so every one of us has 4 different genes that determine what our genetic skin color should be. And we get 2 of them from our mother and 2 from our father. And from each parent, we get one of what's called the A type and one of what's called the B type. And so when you get the A type, you get either what is going to be shown here as a small a or a big A. And when you get the B type from the parent, you're going to get a small b or a big B. And those A, B are going to determine how much of the melanin is produced in your skin and therefore what your skin color is. So you get 2 genes from each parent, one A and one B from each parent. Hope that's straightforward enough there. So as a parent, you have these same 4 genes. You have 2 A's and 2 B's, but they could be little a's or they could be big A's, little b's, or big B's. And so those combinations determine your color, and one of those A's and one of those B's is randomly chosen in the genetic process and results in what you pass on to your children, to each child, and it could be different for each child. So I hope that's relatively clear. We'll go into it some more as we go along. But what you see is in the box at the bottom here, let me bring out my little laser pointer, because I'm going to need it. Laser pointer. Where's my laser pointer? Okay, it's not working. So anyway, in the bottom box there, you see 2 little A's and 2 little B's. And the rule in this system is the capital letters give you more color. Okay, so a person who has 2 little A's and 2 little B's is a white person. Okay, but a person who had all capitals, so capital A, capital A, capital B, would be a person who has very dark black skin. Okay, so the more capital letters you have in that code for you, the darker your skin is. I hope people are following that a little bit. But we'll go through the chart and explain it as we go. So yeah, let's go right to the chart. We'll do that. Okay, so here's the chart. This comes from a group of scientists that are Christians who put this together, and I've taken some of their material for this. So what you see in this chart is on the top side, one parent has contributed those values. On the left side, the other parent has contributed those. And so if you have a parent up in the top left there who has passed on a big A, big B to the child, and the other parent has also passed on a big A, big B, then the child will be big A, big A, big B, big B. And because those are all capital letters, that will be a black skin, very dark brown skin colored person. And down in the bottom right, we'll go to that one. In that case, the parents passed on little A's and little B's, and that results in a white skinned person there. So both parents contributed little A's, little B's. And so now look at it from the perspective of the black person in there, the 2 big A's, the 2 big B's. So when that person has children, they can only pass on capital letters. They have no small letters to pass on. So they are always going to be passing on a big A and a big B to their children. So if they produce children with another person who is also black like that, that child can only be black. There isn't any other choice because you're passing on just capital letters. There are no small letters. And so the population will, when you have a really black-skinned population, it will always be a black-skinned population. There won't be any variation in the genetics of it. There are some other factors I'll talk about later on. Same with the white people. They only have little A's and little B's, and that's all that they can pass on. And so if they mate with another person who only has little A's and little B's, the children can only be white. They couldn't have a black child. It's not a possibility.
Well, if I can throw a little fly in the ointment here. I don't think anybody is really black or anybody's really white. You know, they just seem to have different shades.
Yes, there are some other factors that change your color a little bit. Mm-hmm. All of us are still kind of essentially white, maybe slightly darker than white, but not much. And there are some of those factors are things like sunlight on your skin. I'll talk about those later. Can make you darker, and other things. Even some sicknesses can change your skin color a little bit.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Because every time we address the race and they classify it, you know, are you Indian? I always have a little problem too, because like, and then I was like, you know, I'm not, you know, yeah, I probably have Indian blood, but not the, I guess, if I say I'm Indian, I'm saying that I'm here from these states, Indian.
Yeah.
I cannot claim that. But I'm probably, got probably Indian blood bear from Mexico. So, I always have like, and then someone they say, no, you white. I say, no, I'm dark. So it's always like a big puzzle for me
See,
to.
you think you're dark, but I went to a black church and I don't think you're dark.
No, I mean, like, it's, people that say, no, you can put white. I said, why? It's like, it kind of puzzles me because I say, where do I belong? It's always like,
Yeah.
do you not need a more? How?
Yeah,
Have
and
they
that
made
goes
classifications?
that goes back to what I was saying at the start, is that a lot of people have tried to and still try to classify people by skin color or race like that, and it isn't really productive. It's useful for the police because if you say it's a black guy wearing a red shirt, that's some information he can use to identify somebody what he's looking for. But in most cases, there's no value in a skin color being recorded, but a lot of states still do that. Okay, so we covered the black and the white and how they will only produce, if they mate black with black, they will only produce black. And if they mate white with white, they will only produce white. And this is your genetic code. As we were saying, there are some other factors that change your tone a little bit. So, but there are others like that. There are those like the two middle ones. Boy, I wish I had my laser pointer. Why don't I? There it is. Okay, great. Okay, so in these top two here, you can see that the parent would be passing on either a big A or a big B. And if that person has children with another person who has just a single capital letter, like a big A or a big B, then the result will be a person just like them. They will keep that skin color because that person will have a light bit of color, either a big A or a big B.
Does the A stand for a particular parent or the B stand?
No, it doesn't, not for the parent. Those are just two different genetic systems that you have. There are two genes that control the color, and one is this one they call the A gene, and the other one's called the B gene. So, and each parent, doesn't matter on gender, passes on an A and a B to the children from their set of A and B. That makes some sense? Okay, so what happens is these are called middle browns when they're passing on just a single capital letter of this gene. And they will produce people who have two of these letters, either two big A's or two big B's or big A and a big B in combination. And that's what they will produce naturally. But notice what that produces is it produces a person over here who has a big A and a big B. So this person can actually mate with another person like themselves and result in a child who is black. So people who are middle brown can actually have black children, and they can actually also have white children. And so that's possible when you're coming from the middle, what they call the middle brown categories. If you do that, you can result in that. And maybe your own experiences like that is that among Mexicans, for example, they quite often have very dark-skinned children and a combination of whiter children in the family. And so that's quite a natural thing for them to happen. But that simply doesn't happen when you're mating black and white because they don't have the letters to produce those skin colors. You need to mix something else in to get those. Okay, so you sort of see how this is working now? It's a bit difficult.
It's like in my family, we have, my daddy was the darkest, but he had a brother, he had family where it looked like my dad, but he was white, and he had like a reddish. And then so,
yeah.
It was just like, and even my brother Pedro, he had highlights white and Elizabeth. So like, they carry in some other, and they're not fair skin, but,
Yeah.
And then I know that the uncle had like blue eyes, and I had some cousins, they have, it's a combination, but I mean, it's just, actually I had one cousin, they had one blue eye and the other one green. It was like, what?
Okay.
So,
that'd be a little different.
There's like a variety, a mixture, and even my one of my uncles that was very white hair, he's married, like people like me, the same fair,
Mm-hmm.
and they're my cousins, they're dark skinned like me, but they have green eyes or blue eyes. You know,
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah,
it's,
and that's a different genetic system, but it works similarly like that. You pass on your genes for the eye color as well. Okay, so the things that you need to remember here that I really want to emphasize for the next slide is that when you mate black with black, you can only have black. When you mate white with white, you can only have white. But when you mix middle browns, you can get a whole combination of things. And that's what I want to carry forward to the next slide. Okay, and this will summarize it here. So as I said, if you mate black with black, you can only get a black child. White with white, you can only get a white child. But if they are the middle browns that you're mixing together, they can be anything. The probability of having a black, as you can see in that chart there, is very low. Only 1 in 16 chance of having a really black person or a really white person. You're more likely to get something that's a little bit darker, a little bit light, but you can certainly have the very dark-skinned ones turning up. Okay, so this brings up an interesting question. How did we get to be this way? And that really goes back to the question of what skin color would Adam and Eve be? And you say, well, how could you ever know that? Well, you can, because it makes sense. They couldn't have been white or black. If both of them were white, they could have only ever had white children and passed on white children, and there never would have been anybody darker than that. And similarly, they couldn't have both been black, because if they are both all capital letter black, they would have just had black children. That would have been everything, and there would have never been any white children. So they had to have been middle brown. They had to have been in the middle there. And so this is a chart from that same group talking about that idea that Adam and Eve had to have been middle brown. So something in the light brown shade of their skin color, and they would have been created that way by God. And as we just saw, it's possible, starting from that middle brown coloration, to be able to have anything from a white person to a black person as your offspring. I hope people are following.
it's very interesting.
Okay, so other factors in skin color, we talked about this. These genetics set the body's plan for your skin color. And so that's what the genes should cause those melanocytes to produce for the amount of melanin that they produce that colors your skin. But there are other things that can change that a little bit. Diet can change that. Your age, you tend to get darker with age. Yeah, there's some things that in your diet that can change your skin color a little bit. Not a whole bunch. You can't turn a white person to a black or anything like that. But age, people tend to get darker with age, and color changes that way. Gender sometimes has a little bit of an influence on that. And there are certain diseases that actually can have a pretty marked effect on skin color. So there are things like that that can make noticeable differences in that. And there are also some other things that can result in patchiness of coloration. So instead of having your whole body one uniform color, you'd have patches on that. And one of those patches is something you know as freckles. So a person who has freckles has a little patch of melanocytes there that are producing more of the melanin than they should be according to the genetic plan, for whatever reason that is. And there are other things like certain diseases, again, can cause patchy coloration to happen. Skin injuries can certainly do that. I've got some injuries I can see on my skin that are darker in color. Sunlight exposure, tanning, definitely does that. And you know, with a farmer tan, you can have a person who's dark, from a white person who's dark from here down, they pull up their sleeve and they're pure white up there. So that can result in patchiness as well. So there's a number of factors like that that can affect skin coloring. And now we'll talk about another thing, another kind of melanin. We've been only talking about the brown melanin so far, and that's because that's the one that's most visible to us. But Esther was actually talking about people being a little bit more red than other people, and there is another color system of melanin for that, and it's the yellow to red system. And so that one controls how much yellow you have to your skin or how much red you have in your skin. And it's different genetics for that. We're not going to go in any depth into the genetics on that one, because it's less seen. But when the Oriental people, we tend to refer to them as a little bit yellow skinned, and that's because they've got a little of that yellow pigmentation. But the Native American Indians that we had in this country were called redskins, and that's because they had quite a bit of that red color. So there are examples of that around us. And one that I remember when we went down to South America, and we were in the Mayan areas, we saw people there, and we were told that when you see a Mayan, you'll know, because they have a very reddish, coppery kind of color to their skin. And you'll know that they're Mayan because of that, and also long noses and some other characteristics like that made them identifiable that way. So those are all things that can give you another tone. So you can be a dark person who has a lot of red mixed in, or you can be a dark person who has a lot of yellow mixed in, or any combination of those things can happen. So how did we get population groups that had different skin colors? How did that come about? And for as Bible believers, we can see how God did that. It's not that hard to figure out. He created a genetic system that was capable of these many skin colors, and by making Adam and Eve middle browns, he could produce all of those kind of ranges of colors. That's no problem. But to create, let me just, to create a group that breeds in a consistent color, like we see now. We see Northern Europeans are all white and Africans are all black. How did that come about? And that seems to have come about back when God separated people by their languages. You remember the Tower of Babel in that story. God chose, because they were doing exactly what God told them not to do, staying together and not spreading out across the country, he decided that he was going to force them to, and he gave them a different language. And a lot of scientists looking back at the roots of our languages say that it looks like there are probably 70 or so original languages. When you trace them all back, they would like to think that there's one original language that you could go back to, but they can't ever get back past about 70 languages. And they say that there are roughly 70 and they can't seem to find a way to say that they ever came from a parent language. And that makes sense from what the Bible says. So God split these people up and gave them different languages, but it seems that he split them up also by their skin colors. So he gave them different languages and with their skin colors in mind. And so the languages split them up into blacks and browns that had more red and blacks that had more yellow and a whole bunch of different groups like that. And he created not just a language split, but he also created what was going to be the races that people would come from. And those people all got together and found out who they could speak to, and they would have found that they were all kind of also a skin color group, and they migrated off into different places of the world and headed out. And so that's how the people of the earth were split up into all of these different groups, because they were given different languages that forced them to work together, and they were given that based on their skin color. So God did that through that. That makes some sense that way? Okay, so that's what we believe, and that makes perfect sense to us as believers in God. Evolutionists, of course, don't believe any of that. They have a much different story, much more complicated story. They believe that we started from apes that only have black skin, okay? And Africa is where they believe that happened. So what they believe happened is these apes randomly mutated another kind of melanin, that red-yellow melanin, and then they mutated a gene system for controlling the brown melanin, and then they mutated a gene system for controlling the red-yellow melanin. And all of these things had to have happened because apes don't have the ability to produce anything other than a dark skin color. They don't have a genetic control system like we do for that. So these apes had to have started like they were and then mutated randomly into a system that could produce all of these different skin colors. And then after that, they spread out across Africa into climates, northern climates, and all around the earth. And as they spread out into these climates, they went to climates that changed their colors by selecting for people who had a certain color. And so their idea is that when they went to a northern climate where the sun wasn't as strong, they didn't need to have the dark melanin as much. And so they were selected out that way. And there is some truth to that. Your climate does have some effect on your skin color, but not enough to cause a whole population to change color. That just is unimaginable. You would need you need to have a real pressure to do that. If you really wanted to change a population's color, in a population that had a mix of colors, you would have to really select, and you'd really have to go and kill off all of the people you didn't want who had the wrong color. You would have to do that kind of a thing to cause a population to change color.
Isn't that what Hitler was trying to do as well?
Yeah, he was trying to do the same thing. A similar thing did happen with moths long ago. Moths, hard word to pronounce. This happened back in England. All their factories were putting out black sooty dust, and it was landing on everything. And the moths that came in different colors, from very light colors to very dark colors. And the white moths were very, the trees became so dark that the moths, when they landed on a tree, a white moth would really stand out, and the predators for the white moths would grab them because they were easy to see. But the darker colored moths were dark winged, and they couldn't be seen as well, and so they were harder to catch. And that produced a system where you were really killing off the light-skinned moths. And in Europe, the light-skinned moths are gone now. So you need to have that kind of a pressure where you're actually killing off people who are the wrong color and removing them. And that's the only way you can ever cause a population to change color.
So you're saying like a moth, like a butterfly, but it's a moth?
Yeah, yeah. And so we know that happened in Britain. There were records of that happening at that time. And so the only way you can get a population to change color is you need to start killing off people or bugs or moths or whatever it is. That's the only way you can get enough social pressure from that. And we know that hasn't happened. So nonetheless, that they believe that had to have happened. As these now apes that have changed their skin color, made it possible to have different skin colors, migrated out, they managed to somehow have all of these mutations, and as they went into northern climates, they got lighter skins, and as they stayed in the darker climates, they had darker skins. And so there's a whole bunch of magic things happening here. Magical mutations have to happen. A whole bunch of them have to happen, and these things just don't happen randomly. There's no evidence of this ever being something that could cause a population shift like that.
So all of that is evolutionist thinking?
Yeah, that's all evolutionist thinking. And it involves a whole bunch of that guesswork. Basically, they say hundreds of thousands of years made it possible to do all this stuff. Well, yeah. There needs to be some pressure to cause it to happen, or it won't happen. Okay, now, there are some other things that can cause skin color changes that aren't based on the genetics. And you've probably seen albinos before. And albino is a creature that has a white skin when his genetics should have given him some other color of skin. And it happens in all the vertebrates. It can produce albinos, and even alligators can do that. And we actually saw an alligator one time. It was an albino alligator down in Corpus Christi. And they had to put it in a special shelter because the sun would burn its skin as an alligator, because the white skin for an alligator is too susceptible to the sun. And because alligators hang out with their backs to the sun all the time. So albinos happen in lots of different populations. And this particular picture is an African boy who's become an albino. So his genes inside of him are the big A, big A, big B, big B, and he should be black because of that. But his gene system isn't in control anymore because he's an albino, and the albino affects a different skin. And so in his case, he has all the melanocytes, and the melanocytes should be generating all of this melanin, but the melanocytes are defective and they aren't producing anything. And so he has a little genetic defect in all of his melanocytes that are spread all over his skin, and they don't produce melanin, and so he has no color.
But this affects their eyes as well.
Yes, yeah, it's not just skin color.
Yeah, because they won't be able to see as well as everybody else does.
Yeah, I think it affects their lifespan too.
Really?
Longer lifespan or shorter?
Shorter.
So I'm assuming that according to the expression you made, that they have capital letters.
Well,
Uppercase.
yeah, because you see the kids behind him who are all black-skinned kids, and so his genes are all capital letters.
Yeah.
But and so each of these melanocytes has got capital letters, and it should be cranking out the melanin. But because there's a defect in them, they're not cranking out any melanin at all.
But we don't know what that defect really is, do we?
The scientists do. There's actually a whole bunch of different ones that create an albino, and so you have to actually look at the genes for a person to figure out what the defect is. There are some people who are actually born without any of the melanocytes in their skin at all. They simply don't have those things. Yeah, and there's like 5 or 6 different things that can create an albino, but they're all different defects. They're not genetics. And so it wasn't like this, there were little A's in this guy's parents or little B's in this guy's parents. There's a different defect that happened as he was created, really. And his body just doesn't have the ability to produce any melanin at all. Okay, so, and you can actually tell that because when he has children, he will pass on the big letters to his children, and he will have black children. He won't have white children because he's white. He's passing on the genetics, not the defect, or not necessarily the defect. He could pass on the defect.
Although he may pass the defect on as well, right?
He could, yeah. It's what's called a recessive gene, and so I think both the parents have to have that recessive gene in order for that to happen. So yeah, depending on whether who he mates with, he could create an albino, but if he doesn't, it'll be a naturally colored black child like himself, or like he should have been. Okay, does the Bible mention skin color? The Bible makes almost no mention of skin color. It's very rare to do that. And it's only done purposefully. And so you see things like David, he was described as being ruddy, which means he had kind of a slight reddish color, typical of a young man would have. And so the Bible is telling you that to show that he was a strong, healthy, good-looking, he's called, person. And so the Bible only ever mentions skin color or genetics or characteristics like that when it has a purpose in doing that. And so you don't see hair color or skin color or weight or height or weight mentioned unless there's some good reason behind it. This isn't the way that God distinguishes people. He's just trying to tell the story. And so if you remember the story of Zacchaeus, he's described as being a short person. And the reason he's being described as a short person is that we need to understand that he has to climb up a tree so that he can see Jesus in the crowd. So we're not being told that he's short for any other reason other than that gives him the need to climb up in a tree to be able to see. And that also tells us that although he was a dignified tax collector and a man of much wealth, he had to kind of sacrifice those things and climb up the tree so that he could see Jesus. And so we see from that it was really important to him that he saw Jesus. And so the only reason we're being told that he's short is to make this point that it was really important for him to do that. And it was so important that although he had a wealth and all sorts of other things, he climbed up a tree so that he could see Jesus.
Does it say anything about Moses' wife?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she was from a different group. Was she Ethiopian or something?
Yes.
Yeah. I think that's all it said about her is that she's Ethiopian. And we know from what Ethiopians are. Ethiopia is a country that's, if you go from Israel, you go down south, you get to Egypt, and if you go a little bit to the east, you get to Ethiopia. And the Ethiopian people are black people. And historically that's true too.
Well, Solomon was married, one of his wives was Ethiopian as well.
Okay, you're giving away the next slide. or maybe not the next one or the one after that, but there's one coming up. Okay, so the Bible is very different that way from storybooks. When you get a book from the library and it's a fiction story or whatever, they tell you all the details about the characteristics of the person, whether they're tall or short and all those sorts of things, because they want you to have this image of what this person looks like so you can kind of relate to them in the book. And the Bible is not like that. The Bible isn't interested in skin characteristics or anything, height, weight, none of that stuff matters to God. God doesn't care about those things, and so we shouldn't care about those things either. God is really interested in the real us, who isn't this body. The person inside of us is what he's really after. So we should always keep that in mind, that we are really one race, and God is not interested in our skin color. So here's a quote from Acts 17, 26, 27 that kind of talks about this idea of there was just one race that was ever created, and we are part of that race. From one blood he made the whole earth of humanity to be dwelling on the whole surface of the earth, and he marked out the times in his decrees and set the coasts of the dwelling places of humanity, so that they would be seeking and inquiring after God, and they may find him by his creation, because also he is not far from every one of us. So at the start there you saw, he said, from one blood he made the whole world of humanity to be dwelling on the whole surface of the earth. And that was what God's goal was from the start.